Hey there, I'm Steve Lockman, host of Commander's Gridiron. Grab your favorite snack, grab your favorite drink, put the NHL playoffs on mute because join me for the next hour as we talk about the following of the RFK demolition, retiring Darrell Green's number, a in-depth review of the 2024 NFL draft for the Washington Commanders, the undrafted free agent signings, and what our offensive lineup's going to look at. So be ready, get set. We'll be back in 30 seconds to start this week's episode. Good evening. Welcome once again to Commander's Gridiron. I'm your host. Thank you all for tuning in, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or Twitch. As always, we're going to talk about a lot of things tonight. You will see those topics scrolling across the bottom of your screen in order so you know what's coming up, you know what we talked about, kind of know how to guide some of your questions and conversation. Feel free to use that chat box, whatever you're watching on, whether you're watching on any of our platforms. If you're using Twitter, feel free to message through there as well. We'll get it all. We love conversation. We love questions. And as always, we got a lot to talk about. You know, in the off season, we do a show every 3 weeks, which kind of gives it a nice little break because there's not a whole lot to do in the off season since we're not reviewing games, previewing games and the schedule and stuff like that. But as you may remember from the last episode here at Commander's Gridiron, we spent the vast majority of the episode talking about the upcoming 2024 NFL draft. So as kind of what precedes that is kind of the review of that 2024 draft, kind of see how our team did under new GM Adam Peters, new head coach Dan Quinn and company. I think they did really well for the amount of picks they had, a couple trades here and there. We're going to talk about all that. But as you know, we kind of always like to start the show with kind of some non-X's and O's news, kind of some off the field stuff for our Washington Commanders. And there's kind of two things that jumped out over the last 3 weeks, kind of more so in the last week and a half than when we first left the air 3 weeks ago. And the biggest one being recently the announcement that the former RFK Stadium, better known as the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Stadium, the former home of the Washington Redskins, was actually permitted now to be demolished. So for those of you that don't know, obviously this was the former home of the Redskins for many, many years before they went to FedEx Field in 94. And basically is the former home of the Washington Redskins. It was 67 years old, has not been operational since 2019. And even then, like up until 2019, DC United used it for a home soccer stadium. They used it for concerts and friendly matches between European football teams and rugby and stuff like that. But now the National Park Service says Events DC, which is actually the company that owns the stadium, can move forward with the demolition process. So because the land that the stadium sits on is actually federal property, we kind of discussed this a lot in the talk of the new stadium process and where they might go. As everything does with federal projects and property, there has to be an environmental assessment, right? So that's kind of what held up the demolition process, or I should say the permitting process. So they had to do an environmental assessment to determine the impact of the demolition would have on the area and surrounding businesses. Obviously, the NPS comes back, says, hey, look, there's no significant impact. The work can proceed. So, what does this mean? Basically, they basically found that no significant impact was going to be produced as a result of tearing this stadium down. It's been empty for over 5 years, and its structural condition actually rendered it, viable to have the stadium being torn down. So given the numerous and serious structural deficiencies, there's no reasonable way to either rehabilitate or renovate RFK Stadium to serve the originally intended purposes or any other similar project or purpose. That was actually put out by the NPS in the report. So There's basically going to be 4 phases to the demolition: hazardous materials abatement, selective demolition, structural demolition, and then basically, once you have a flat parking lot, some regrading and backfilling and stuff like that, landscapes will start thing. So the exact timeline is uncertain, but it gets us one step closer to actually demolition and having the stadium fall down. So as Paul chimes in, are they open the stadium for fans to buy seats, memorabilia for people prior to demo? So actually, it's funny you bring that up. Over the last, I'm going to say 2 years at least, maybe even longer, they've actually been going inside and removing all of basically everything that you kind of just alluded to, right? The biggest of which was the stadium seats. I think it was something to the tune of like 40,000 seats that they actually removed, from the plastic seat backs to the actual wooden seats itself. A bunch of different vendors went in there, ripped them out. I know they were selling them online anywhere from like $300 to $1,000, depending on which ones you got and how many, and the sets and stuff like that. So they actually had gone in, removed a bunch of the stuff that they could remove. A bunch of the food and beverage signage and just stadium signage and stuff like that was already ripped out and taken out. So pretty much from the pictures and what you read about, it's basically just a stadium shell that's falling apart. So once all this happens, speculation, obviously, amongst the DC media, amongst the fans and the viewers here at Commanders Gridiron, speculation will likely increase regarding whether the Washington Commanders might consider the site for their future home. Having no stadium on that property and nothing to worry about for demolition certainly puts that as the leading favorite for a stadium site selection, right? Got to think so. With the recent occurrence and events of what happened with the Washington Capitals, Washington Wizards, and the state of Virginia, and basically that whole back and forth cancellation of their new stadium, I should say new arena project in Northern Virginia, there's a lot of talk and speculation with some certainty that the football team will not want to engage Virginia and have the same thing happen with them. So a stadium project in Virginia seems unlikely, so to speak. Don't know what the particular percentage is on that. So basically, it's basically going to be between Washington, D.C. and the state of Maryland. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of how that whole plays out. As always, when that stuff breaks, we'll kind of go through there and kind of bring up the updated status of the stadium talk and design, so to speak. The second piece of news that came out regarding our beloved Washington Commanders, since we were on air last, was an announcement made by Josh Harris and company, actually more specifically Josh Harris, Mitchell Rales, and some Washington Redskin alumni. It's actually a really cool video. I shared it on most of my social media, and you may or may not have seen it as you were browsing your social feeds as well. But an announcement was made and a statement put forth from Josh Harris, the managing partner of the Washington Commanders. And I'll just read the statement, and then we'll basically figure out why, or you can see it rolling across the bottom of your screen there on the ticker. And it says, the Washington Commanders proudly announced today, on April 25th, that we will retire the jersey worn by one of the greatest players in NFL history, Darrell Green, during the 2024-25 season. This decision comes as a tribute to Green's unparalleled contributions to both our franchise and the league as a whole. Darrell Green's legacy transcends the boundaries of the football field. Throughout his remarkable career, Green embodied the values of excellence, perseverance, and sportsmanship on and off the field. His speed, skill, and dedication to the game and our community for a record 20 years earned him the nickname the Ageless Wonder and made him a beloved figure in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Retiring Darrell Green's jersey symbolizes our commitment to preserving the rich history and traditions of our franchise. His presence as one of the greatest players to ever wear the burgundy and gold will forever be felt at Commanders Field, serving as an inspiration to current and future generations of players, coaches, and fans. As we embark on a new era for the Washington Commanders, we are honored to pay tribute to Darrell Green and celebrate his enduring legacy. We thank him for his countless contributions to our franchise and the community and look forward to officially retiring his jersey. So as Joe chimes in, wow, I thought Green's jersey was already retired, right? So it's funny you say that, and there's been a lot of assumptions amongst the Washington fans of like kind of who's next. So they did the memorial contribution that was kind of a fiasco. in conjunction with allegedly Sean Taylor's family that, they retired that number, right? So, in the best that I can find out, there's only a few numbers that are officially retired by our beloved franchise. 33, Sammy Ball, 21, Sean Taylor, 42 from Bobby Taylor, and then now what's going to be 28 for Darrell Green. So the number is very few. There's a ton of individuals in the Ring of Honor marking, the initial 70 greatest, 80 greatest, 90 greatest Redskins and players throughout the history of our franchise. But there's very few numbers that are actually officially retired. So as Paul says, a statue, I mean, the ageless wonder deserves one, right? And I think that's kind of where our team's going to go with this. So first, let's address the fact that they're actually retiring Darrell Green's number. So, Darrell Green, as they said, played 20 years for the Washington Redskins, was, undoubtedly probably one of the greatest cornerbacks in NFL history. And when you kind of think of that era, they weren't as obviously in the passing era that they are now, where basically every quarterback is lighting up the NFL for 5,000 yards plus. But, when teams were passing, teams didn't like to play the Redskins and the secondary for Darrell Green, right? And when you think about secondary players, not necessarily safeties, but strictly cornerbacks, the two biggest that come to mind pre-passing era in no particular order is probably Deion Sanders and Darrell Green. Hey, Dave, what's going on? Thanks for checking in. Thanks for watching your NFC East divisional foes show tonight. And hi, Eileen. I'm great. Love to be back here doing another episode, and thank you all for tuning in. And as I was saying, it's interesting that, they now retire this guy's jersey, and there's a lot of kind of backstory and back workings to doing it, right? As Paul says, he was only named the NFL's fastest man. And actually, I think if you look at it, and there's like goofy competitions that they did, like the NFL skills and the Pro Bowls and stuff like that. I think I have it on one of my football helmets, that he's actually like the 4-time winner of the NFL's fastest man. And it's funny when you look at those old videos from like the 90s when they run the 40-yard dash against each other. They're like, Darrell Green was only like 5'10", like 5'9", 5'10". And, it was super interesting that, he would literally outrun everybody. And did they retire Clinton Portis yet? Actually, no, they didn't. They've retired nobody from 1980, 1985 to current, other than Sean Taylor. So, as Joe Sullivan says, I'll never forget what he did in 87 at Chicago. What a performance, right? And that's the thing is, Darrell Green, for his size and stature, was one of the best shutdown corners in the NFL. Aside from his speed, one of his biggest, I guess you could say it kind of went along with his speed, but he made up for his deficiency in height, which I'm vertically challenged too, by using his speed and using that for angle of pursuits, right? So like whether the guy caught a ball on him or whether somebody else caught a ball going down the field, he would literally run somebody down, catch him, tackle him, force a fumble, something like that. But Darrell Green was also a ball hawk too, had a ton of interceptions to go along in his storied career. So, this is much deserved. Growing up, Darrell Green was one of my favorite players on the Washington Redskins. I actually played DB in junior high and high school. My number was actually 28, obviously for Darrell Green, and on the offensive side for Marshall Faulk, for those of you that remember him when he played for the Colts. So this is much deserved. On a non-football side of things, it's super interesting that this is now happening, coming from Josh Harris. And before we move on to our next topic, we're going to talk about why this is kind of important, right? That for the longest time, Darrell Green was not going to be associated with the Washington Redskins, Washington football team, that whole debacle. Once the investigation started piling on, the inappropriateness of staff and the workforce at Redskins Park in Ashburn, coupled with just, Snyder issue after Snyder issue after Snyder issue, he really distanced himself and basically, I don't want to say alienated himself, but basically told the team to go pound sand, that he's not doing events, he wasn't really doing autograph signings, wasn't really, going to be involved in representing the organization that he played his whole career for, right? And as Joe says, obviously I wasn't a fan, but Green was one guy you really had to respect, even as an opponent. Definitely class act while he was playing, even up until like the whole Snyder went downhill right before the regime change. He was a true class act, would do events, do, a lot of charity work in the DC area. But, like I said, as of recently, it was interesting because, there was really that disconnect between him and the organization. So one of the things that Josh Harris and company tried to do, as they moved the team forward under the new regime, was honor the past of the previous franchise name and the Redskins, the alumni and stuff like that. By trying to get them more involved, welcoming them back in, more alumni events or appearances, stuff like that. And Darrell Green has basically embraced that. And this is one way that they've been doing that for the alumni as well. So on a quick side note, before we jump to our next topic, one of the things I actually heard on a DC area insiders podcast from last evening was Mitchell Rales, who's one of the co-owners with Josh Harris of the Washington Commanders, was at an event last weekend, made the comment, I think this is an awesome idea. They're just not sure where it's going to be yet. And I'd be interested to know from the people that are viewing, about your own teams. So the Washington Commanders are basically going to make like a team hall of fame. Now, whether that includes, as Paul kind of alluded to, hey, is there going to be a statue of Darrell Green coming and the rest of the individuals who have retired numbers? I don't know. But I think it's a really cool idea, right? I get it. Our team has kind of transformed between, 3 different franchise names, but we're still DC football. And it's kind of the way to bring that rich storied history of the Washington Redskins and kind of marry it with, the franchise going forward as the Commanders, whether or not they change their name, who knows? And just that whole transition, between what they kind of were temporarily in the football team and then now as the Commanders, right? It's kind of undecided whether it's going to be that facility, so to speak, the Hall of Fame is going to be at Ashburn or wherever the new training complex is going to be, or whether it's going to be integrated as part of the new stadium. Either way, I think it's going to be really cool. I think it would be a really cool experience for fans, kind of along those lines. So, as a fan, it's just kind of something that gets you excited, right? To kind of hear that like they're at least thinking about it and they want to do something like that. So the other thing, actually number 3, kind of the off the field stuff before we talk about the big draft recap for the rest of tonight's episode. We kind of knew going into the new ownership regime, obviously it was announced, Magic Johnson, Basketball Hall of Famer, is part of the ownership group. And, we kind of wonder what his role was going to be as one of the limited partners of the Washington Commanders. We know he's part owner of the Dodgers, and, he has a big, diverse investment portfolio as well. Great businessman, obviously a Hall of Fame athlete, blah, 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 blah. His accolades kind of speak for themselves. So, we're kind of wondering how his influence of, I don't say notoriety, but fame and public acumen and business acumen would play into the Commanders stable, right? And one of the things that was so awesome to see, because it's kind of starting to pay off for Magic and especially guys on the team now. But, obviously my favorite player, I wear his jersey every episode. One of them, comes out of the closet, Terry McLaurin. So Magic Johnson hosted Terry McLaurin and the owner of Netflix, basically for a dinner business meeting. And it's kind of interesting because, Magic Johnson puts, a post on his Facebook, Twitter, or something basically almost every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Sometimes it's, reactions to NBA playoffs or whatever, or it's just something about, what he did during his day. And most of the time people don't care, but if you're a DC fan, like you kind of watch it a little bit more closely, right? It's kind of like, like Dallas fans probably watch Jerry Jones's Twitter a little bit more, kind of guys like and gals for whatever market you're in. And, this is no less here. So Magic Johnson tweeted out a picture of him and Terry and the owner of Netflix and said, I took Commander star receiver Terry McLaurin to lunch. Actually, it was a lunch dinner. And today in Los Angeles to talk about the Commanders, life after football, his entrepreneurial aspirations, and networking with individuals to kind of help that get off the ground, just that networking process. So this is kind of where that whole realm of Magic Johnson is going to start paying off for guys on the team, right? So it's kind of super interesting that the way Magic Johnson is going to start kind of injecting his influence, so to speak, into the team is by doing stuff like this, being a business mentor, kind of taking guys under his wing and saying, hey, look, Terry was drafted in 2019. So this is Terry's going to be sixth season already, right? Well, fifth going into sixth season. So, once you're done playing football, what do you want to do? What do you think you want to do? Let's talk about football. Let's talk about the Commanders. I know you've got, you're on like your 15th quarterback by now, talk some X's and O's, stuff like that. But then, hey, let's talk about life after football. What do you want to do for business wise? How can, we kind of help set you up? How can we network? Oh, by the way, the guy we're having dinner with owns Netflix, that kind of deal. So it's just kind of really, kind of refreshing to see somebody from management taking, a player outside of football, maybe talking a little X's and O's, but talking more life and business outside than that. So as Paul says, I never watched Jerry Jones' Twitter. He lies to us. Oh, because he says he's all in, right? How? Question mark. Especially when you only got like $3 million to pay for, $15 million worth of players. So I get you, brother. Definitely. But like I said, it's definitely interesting. Something, that's worth noting because most of the time, nobody under the former regime would ever do that with our players. Nobody before even he became the sole owner and he had, minority partners or limited partners, the owner of FedEx was one of Snyder's co-owners in the football team, but he would never do stuff like that. So it was super interesting to see that happen and kind of see that go on and what he can share with Terry or any of the other players that he may have done it already with or that he plans to, and kind of see how that develops over the years as him being an owner of the Washington Commanders. All right. Out of the Box Sports Entertainment. Twitter viewers, you can now comment live by clicking the live video stream box on the Out of the Box Sports Twitter, then clicking the video box once again, and the chat box will appear at the bottom to comment. That's kind of specific to Twitter. You use there's directions there in your Twitter box if you're watching me on Twitter, which is where most of our viewers do come from. Follow those directions there that Paul put up for me, and we'll get your messages, we'll get your comments, we'll get your questions. Feel free to chime in. Doesn't have to necessarily be about the topic at hand. I jump all over the place. And, as my wife says, I'm always getting in the weeds of anything and everything about my team. So, hey, Kenny, what's up? Thanks for joining me. You can catch Ken on the Bat Cave every week as well. That man is the devoted sports-aholic, follows the Mets, follows the Raiders, hockey. My goodness, he's all over the place. But catch him on the calendar, catch one of his shows. Great to follow, great to see. As we jump into the NFL draft recap, real quick, let's go over where we sat. Obviously, we know that we had the number 2 overall pick in round 1. The second round, we had pick 36 and pick 40. 40 was actually via Chicago from the Montez Sweat trade, the trade deadline last season. Then we picked third round, number 67, number 78, which was via Seattle. And then we picked 100, which was from the Chase Young trade at the trade deadline as well last season. Then we picked 139 in round 5, 152 in round 5, and 222 in round 7. So going into the draft, we had 9 picks over the 3 days. We had 6 picks in the top 100. So let's take a look at how we did, right? One of the things that was super interesting, and we kind of knew it going into it, there wasn't a whole lot of speculation that, we knew look, it was kind of the world's worst kept secret. Two things, right? Number one, Caleb Williams was going to Chicago. It's kind of a given. Everybody knew it. The NFL doesn't allow teams to come out before the draft and officially say, hey, we're taking so-and-so from so-and-so college. They want at least some kind of a suspense. They want it to be at least some kind of build up to them, making the announcement on Thursday night that, player A is being drafted overall number one. However, there was still speculation going into Thursday that, oh, there you go. Hey, Ken, I enjoy the abuse that the Mets, the Raiders, and the Kings put me through. Hey, look, I can feel you on all that abuse. 24 years of Dan Snyder, 2 playoff appearances in the last 10 years with no playoff wins, and going through 20 years of quarterback rotations just for one team. I feel your pain. So I know where you're coming from, brother. So, like I said, it was kind of a toss up, even with the sportsbook people, whether who we were going to take going on at number 2, right? There's still going to be a lot of conversation about Jaden Daniels at number 2, Drake May at number 2. There was wild speculation that, oh my God, we might be going for JJ McCarthy from Michigan at number 2. Talk of, even Michael Penix, that was the surprise first round pick of the draft. If you watched the live draft here at Out of the Box Sports Network that night, as well as, the Football Frenzy 2. But kind of hearing from inside sources, specific sources before the draft, even as early as 2 to 3 weeks before the draft, unless something drastically changed, the Washington Commanders were geared to pick Jaden Daniels. It's kind of interesting, all the hype and the back and forth, the building of one player, tearing down of another. It's lying season when you're going into the NFL draft, especially going up to the first round, the first night of the first round. But, talking to some individuals who are close to the team, close to some of those decision makers, they had basically already kind of penciled in Jaden Daniels unless something changed, right? And as Paul says, look, the writing was on the wall, Kingsbury type offense, Jaden Daniels. And, look, Heisman Trophy winner last year, coming out of LSU. It's super interesting that, they were wondering, does he get picked? When does he get picked? How's he get picked? That kind of deal. And, as Ken says, I said there was never a chance that Washington would trade out of the number 2 spot. I definitely didn't think, I agree with you. I definitely didn't think we were going to trade out of the number 2, only because we needed a quarterback so bad. And with a lot of teams, obviously there are 6 quarterbacks taken in the top 12 picks in this year's draft. So if we would have traded out of number 2, you can't trade too far down knowing that you still need a quarterback, because like I said, obviously there were 6 taken in the top 12. So, unless you wanted basically leftovers in the hay barn, there weren't going to be the quarterback that you want wasn't going to be there if you traded back. So I definitely agree. Hey, let's pick up Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels, 6'4", 210-pound quarterback out of LSU from San Bernardino, California. Basically, he had a prospect grade on the NFL stat board at 6.73. Good enough to get him drafted number 2 overall in the first round pick. Some of the big things about Jaden Daniels, obviously, his strengths is marked by the command of the field and his football intelligence, great football IQ, right? Recognizes pre-snap pressures and has a plan to counter it. And he's more of a game manager, kind of, so to speak, which is great for us because, look, you might not win a whole lot of games, but he's not going to put you in a position to lose a bunch of games, right? He kind of reminds me of when we had Alex Smith. And whether you liked Alex Smith or not, Alex Smith wasn't very flashy. Alex Smith didn't put up, 4,000, 5,000 yards a season. What did Alex Smith do? Alex Smith got you enough points to win the game with little to zero turnovers to manage the game, right? And that's what you want in a quarterback, to win the game at the end of, when regulation is done. So I kind of feel we're getting a lot of that in Jaden Daniels. Reads the full field, really good with rhythm, through his progressions. Willing to plant the flag, attack the defenses from the pocket, great passer, great arm strength, maintains that passing platform, has good feet as well. Made footwork as a passer his priority during his college career, and basically has the running talent to go with it to be that double threat mobile quarterback, to keep defenses honest, right? However, with all the strength and good and positive things about him, there are some weaknesses. He is kind of slender, right? He's basically just a little bit bigger model of the cornerback that we drafted last year out of Mississippi State in Emmanuel Forbes. So, and Paul says, it's crazy knowing my high school alumni in Southern California play Jaden Daniels High School now every year. Oh, and Cajun High School. Gotcha. Which is kind of interesting because, you look at where individuals come from and like what they play in high school and the guys that are coming out of those schools. It's just crazy sometimes. Some of the other weaknesses, that you kind of got to watch for as we go through rookie camps that they're doing right now, as well as, OTAs coming up in the next month and then going into training camp. There is some concern that he's got a lack of zip on the ball, which creates danger for him outside the numbers, even though he has the arm strength to get the ball there, right? He will drop his eyes in the pocket to scan for exits sometimes, below average push and placement on deep throws, substantially more accurate on the rollouts than as a scrambling passer. Has a tendency somewhat to leave, basically fall off on the fade throws, leaving them short or underthrowing them. But, you get a good quarterback coach, you get a good offensive coordinator, and I think a lot of those issues are going to be addressed, especially if you have a decent quarterback room to go with it to get you, kind of that good experienced quarterback room. So Paul Spencer says, I'm a little worried about Daniel's size, very light in weight, and he likes to run when options are not there, a little less zip and hard to reach pockets. And those are all adequate concerns. I think one of the good things about it, look, once that kid got drafted and he's hitting Ashburn, that strength and conditioning coach in DC is going to be like, hey boy, we need to get you, 20 to 30, 40 pounds more on your frame, start bulking you up, beefing you up, for the beating you're going to take as an NFL quarterback. But I think overall, he's going to learn what he needs to do. And more importantly, he's going to learn what he needs not to do. And the fact that, hey, look, sliding more, take the slides, run out of bounds, don't force the ball, which we saw happening a lot with Sam Howell and et cetera, et cetera. So certainly interesting to see what this kid can do. Quite possibly, being our franchise quarterback over the next, over how many years. So it'll be certainly interesting to see, I love to see how he does. Show him some Anthony Richard film from the Colts. Absolutely. There's a lot of good guys that he can watch and kind of, just learn from. It doesn't need to be, doesn't have to emulate them, doesn't have to be, copying them, just, take a piece here. This works. This doesn't work. Learn what not to do, learn what to do, and just be a sponge and absorb as much as you can, right? Before we talk about the beginning of round 2 picks, we're going to talk about our sponsors for tonight here at Out of the Box Sports Network and the Commanders Gridiron. And first up for our sponsors is Jason Fine, attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123, specializing in motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, workers' comp, personal injury claims. Has 3 convenient office locations throughout Pennsylvania and New Jersey, one located in Philly, one located in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, one located in Pittsburgh, PA. Give Jason a call for all of your legal needs. Remember, if he doesn't win, he doesn't collect. There for legal advice, there for legal representation. That's Jason Fine, a.k.a. Attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123. And of course, join in the cult at Monkey Cult Coffee, the evolution of flavor-infused coffee, with 4 flavors now in toasted coconut rum, bourbon chocolate chip, the agave, and our newest flavor, honey agave, along with the barrel-aged honey as well to go with your coffee. Use promo code OOTB Sports for your online discount. The evolution of flavor-infused coffee. Get all of your coffee mugs, apparel, coffee grinders, needs, and beans at Monkey Coffee. Use that promo code OOTB Sports for your online discount at monkeycoffee.com. All right, back to the draft review real quick. Beginning off at the second round, this is where I kind of thought, in our last episode, as well as, even the night when I was participating with the fellow show hosts here at Out of the Box Sports in the live draft, we were kind of talking about what would the Commanders do after the first round. And I kind of knew they were going to do one of two things. I had my money on something else, but you know what? I'll gladly take what they did, right? So I was kind of under the impression that the Commanders would take some of their picks that they acquired through the trades of the deadline last year, trade back up into the first round, whether that was like in the last, third or, the second half of the first round to pick up a offensive tackle that was so desperately needed. But it just didn't happen, right? So as we were going through the first round, Washington didn't trade back. Washington didn't trade back in, didn't trade back in. And here we are. We ended up the first round. So, after that, then you kind of know that, okay, well, we're going to stay put. We're going to take 36. We're going to take 40 and see what we do. So it was interesting because, and the reason I say that, so while we picked up a couple good players that we're going to review here real quick, one of the things that was super interesting was all of the keyboard GM on social media was like, oh my God, what is this team doing? Literally, it's the first round of the NFL draft. We picked one guy. Everybody knew who that guy was going to be, Jaden Daniels, right? And they're like, why didn't our team, trade back up into the first round, trade back up? So it actually came out on Saturday. I think it was Saturday or Sunday. So like either once the draft was almost over or as the draft was over. I guess it was actually after the draft was over because Adam Peters did a press conference. And one of the local media guys actually asked Adam Peters, hey, was there an attempt to get back up into the first round with, a package of the picks that you guys had, blah, 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 blah. And Adam Peters actually answered that question by saying, look, we made numerous calls, numerous proposals to different teams to get back up into the first round again to draft that player. However, obviously we just couldn't work it out, couldn't pull the trigger. Compensation couldn't be agreed upon, it goes on from there and there. So I love the fact that they tried, they tried with multiple teams. He wouldn't list who those teams were, but he said, hey, look, we tried to go back up as high as halfway. So basically you got to be led to believe, they tried to trade back up to like 16, 16, 17, to get that offensive tackle that they were so craving, but, just didn't pan out for them. So, they go ahead and they turn around and they take pick number 36, which is Zerhan Newton, defensive tackle out of Illinois. Now, what it was kind of interesting about this was I don't think anybody and their brother thought that Washington was going to pick a defensive tackle to start off the second round. A lot of people had to scratch their heads, especially when you're looking at, hey, look, we have two perennial Pro Bowlers, all pro caliber tackles in Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne, along with Mathis, who played about 2/3 of the season last year when he wasn't hurt. So the guys are kind of like, why did you get Newton? Does that mean that, Allen and or Payne is going to be traded this year? What? But, knowing that Dan Quinn and defensive coordinator as well put an emphasis on, defensive line play and stuff like that, as well as, another guy to throw in the rotation, it kind of became evident once they made that pick that while they're going for need, they're also going for like best available player on the draft board at that time and trying to make a combination thereof, right? So as Paul says, I thought Newton was a great pick. Surprised he dropped, but with all the quarterbacks going and then runs on the corners, I think they felt best available at that position. I had top 6 on my defensive end board, right? I kind of had to do a little research. I mean, everybody kind of knew the name. We talked about it on draft night. We kind of talked about it going into the preview after we recapped the first round and talked about, needs for the second round and stuff like that on our NFL Draft Live show. But, Newton is 6'2", 304 pounds. out of St. Petersburg, Florida, played for the Fighting Illini at Illinois. And, he's going to provide that rotational depth to help on the defensive front. He's an active interior defender with the potential to build on his disruptive production in college, right? I mean, playing in the Big Ten, one of the big Power 5 conferences, it kind of only sets you up for success. He's compact, he's muscular with a bunch of upper body strength, loose limbs, able to press and set firm edges as well. He's got a lot of agility. Tape shows a player capable of rushing with a purpose and a plan and not a whole lot of freelancing like we had in our number 2 overall pick out of Ohio State, who no longer played for the team. But on the flip side, he tends to catch rather than jolt blockers at the initial contact, right? Kind of letting them get to you before you get to them. Needs to tighten up his shed timing as a tackler. Little shaky pad level, prevents consistent pocket pass, basically as a pass rusher. Occasionally loses the rush lane integrity when searching for that pressure. So, it's kind of like a moth to the light and not necessarily, doing maintaining that consistency of what he needs to do going forward. But, like I said, I think he's going to be a very welcomed addition to the defense. Hey, welcome to DC, Jerzon Newton. So this is where it kind of got interesting. We actually traded in the second round and picked up another pick that in the process. And then we fell back to pick number 50 in the second round and, filled a need with a good player. Coming off a national championship team, we selected Mike Sainristil out of cornerback out of Michigan. And, Paul chimes in. Sainristil is solid, 6 picks last year in the Big Ten. He gave Harrison his lowest output yardage wise of the season. MHJ out of Ohio State, right? Who went to the Arizona Cardinals. And, knowing that secondary was a big need for us, knowing that, our secondary was Swiss cheese last year, I agree with Paul. I think this was a good pickup. Definitely a little bit bigger frame than somewhat than, what Emmanuel Forbes is, but they're kind of similar, right? Sainristil is 5'9", 182 pounds, basically the same size, give or take, as Emmanuel Forbes, but I think he's a little bit more physical than Forbes is, right? Ran a 4.40 and had a 40-inch vertical jump, basically, did his cone drills in just under 7 seconds, the broad jump of a little over almost 11 feet. So did fairly well at the NFL Combine. I think he's going to come in. Is he going to be an instant starter? Possibly. He's definitely going to be a rotational player for the secondary. Definitely going to see the field. And having some of that college football playoff experience as well as winning a national title is going to bode well for him. I think he's going to do well in our secondary. He better be ready because, look, he's going to be facing a lot of big time NFL receivers, especially in our division in the NFC East between the Cowboys, the Giants, and the Eagles. So he's definitely got his work cut out for him. But, hey, welcome to DC, Mike Sainristil. The next one that I'm actually kind of excited about, and we picked it up in the second round at pick number 53, kind of was a need. We signed Zach Ertz in the offseason from the Arizona Cardinals to a 1-year deal. I think it was more of obviously a need to fill a hole. And, look, Zach Ertz has been in the league for a long time. How much does he really have left in the tank? Who knows? Can he stay healthy? Hopefully. But, let's bring in Zach Ertz to help mentor the young tight end room that we have. We have Bates, we have Turner. If I was talking to a friend the other day, if I could take Bates and Turner and make them one tight end, it'd be amazing. We would have, George Kittle and Kelsey, 2.0. I forget by their names, but, let's say Bates is a good catcher, terrible run blocker. Turner is the opposite, right? If I could combine those two guys together, we'd have a hell of a tight end. But we went out in the second round and pick number 53, took Ben Sinnott, tight end out of K-State. And, looking up for some stats and information on Ben, look, he's 6'4", 250 pounds, has the size to play tight end. in the NFL. Look, he ran a 4.6 40-inch vertical jump, long jump, 10.5 feet. So the kid can do it, right? He's got some physical prowess with him. And, as Paul says, Sennett is a project for Daniels at tight end. Downfall, not a pass blocker, but has over 15 plays at 25 yards downfield, right? So he kind of reminds me of, a guy that, not quite as good as like a Brock Bowers, but has the potential to get there. I think being in a tight end room with Zach Ertz, Bates, and Turner, look, the kid's going in at number 4 on the depth chart, has the easily potential, depending on how he works on his craft, to jump to 3, maybe even 2. His focus is going to have to be on that run blocking and to see how he can do that inside the offensive scheme under Cliff Kingsbury. So, but, look, he's got the speed and agility to run routes on all 3 levels. He gets there quickly, maneuvers around redirection, adequate and contested catch toughness, quick to adjust his target points and route running, light on his feet for angles and positional blockers, and can move the chains with his basically run after catch, right? But he does have some weaknesses. He fails to fit up run blocks with a lot of command, with a lot of force. Needs to drop pad levels, stay inside, keep those hands inside more often. Won't offer much help as a single blocker in pass pro. So, where that concerns a lot of people is, look, we go against some prolific defensive end edge rushers. So, he's not going to be that guy that can take those defensive players on one-on-one. He's going to need help. He's going to need, that chip block from the tackle. He's going to need help from a pulling lineman. He's going to need, he's basically not going to be able to do it one-on-one. But, the potential is there. So, let's see what the kid can do. Welcome to DC, Ben Sennett, tight end, Kansas State. Next in the 3rd round, pick 67. We kind of waited a while to take this position, which I think PO'd a lot of fans, but, hey, it is what it is. And that was Brandon Coleman, offensive tackle out of TCU. And Paul says, I think Coleman ends up inside based on his power technique. He lacks the speed needed in the NFL on the edges. And, you very well may be right. The only problem that – actually, I should say the 2 problems that come up with this, right? We only drafted 1 offensive tackle. That's number 1. Number 2, we have some pretty decent guards. The question is, can those guards, if they kind of do the lineman shuffle, are those guards good enough to kind of swap out and play tackle? I'm not 100% convinced yet that they can. Now, going into a new offensive scheme under Cliff Kingsbury, it'll be interesting to see how all those offensive packages, line protections, and stuff like that work in his offensive system. So, look, are we moving the pocket a lot? Are we doing a lot of pulling? Are we doing a lot of motion misdirection to try and keep the defense, not in the box, spread out, moving around to kind of cover our guys and our weapons, that kind of deal. So it might help the offensive line out a little bit more. It'll kind of remain to be seen. But Brandon Coleman coming out of TCU, look, the dude's big. He's 6'4", 313 pounds, out of TCU from Denton, Texas. And, the big man still ran a 4.99 40. And, look, he's got that broad frame with the A+ wingspan. He does have tackle and guard experience. He's patient with the double team timing, has good feet, holds the secure block, throws the direct pass, the pass punch, and reworks his hands to stay on top. But it will be on the wrong side of the pad level on more snaps than not, unfortunately. He does struggle to create displacement sometimes with his leg drive, does allow weight to rock inside and out, and, in his base in the pass pro, has trouble with sudden change of direction against rush counters, which some of those guys are really known for, and the way they put their moves on offensive linemen, tight ends, basically the offensive lineman or the offensive package. But, anyhow, we'll see what you can bring to the team, kid. Welcome to DC, Brandon Coleman. And of course, moving right along at the end of round 3 and pick 100, it's kind of interesting that, the Washington Commanders selected Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver out of Rice. Why does that name sound familiar? It's because his dad's a Hall of Famer, Ed McCaffrey. He used to play for the Denver Broncos. Older brother, CMC, used to play for the Carolina Panthers, now the prolific running back pass catcher for the San Francisco 49ers. And as Paul says, McCaffrey is a solid journeyman, but a high IQ. Played quarterback in college at Nebraska. Did not know that. And 2 years at wide receiver at Rice, and the pedigree of the family can't go wrong, right? Mom was a Olympic volleyball player, graduate out of Stanford. Sister played collegiate sports on some astronomical level as well. The whole family is like God's gift to athletes. So he's going to bring a lot to the team. He definitely has the potential to, look, they keep, even before Kingsbury came into to DC, Washington keeps 6, 7, and in 1 year, 8 wide receivers, but usually it's around 6 or 7. And McCaffrey has the potential to upplant probably 2 or 3 of those. So, his potential to make the team, the final 53, is definitely high. To the likes of, Pringle, beating out Dax Milne, beating out, possibly Jamison Crowder, although Crowder brings the special teams catch into him. But strictly from a wide receiver perspective, McCaffrey has the potential to make the roster and be a decent, rotational wide receiver. Ran the 40 and 4.4, 36-inch vertical jump. And let's take a look at this, a little closer look at this kid. As Paul said, he's a former quarterback, took a big step forward in the second season at receiver, accelerates into the top speed fairly quickly. His run routing's improved, especially over last season in 2023. Focus drops do not exist in his dojo, but he does have some weaknesses, right? He had trouble releasing cleanly against some serious pressing. Movement is more one speed and sudden and shifty. Still needs work getting in and out of breaks. Just needs to clean that up a little bit more. But he can improve with adjustments coming back to deep throws. So I think his kind of situational awareness isn't the greatest, but it's not completely bad either, right? So it'll be super interesting to see how he does. So welcome to DC, Luke McCaffrey. Then we jumped to the 5th round because we didn't have any picks in the 4th round. And in the 5th round, we picked Jordan McGee, linebacker out of Temple. As Paul says, McGee was a solid linebacker. I think he ends up on special teams, but can turn heads if given the opportunity. And I think he's definitely going to be given the opportunity because, look, we didn't pick up Jamin Davis, former first-round draft pick out of Kentucky. Did not pick up his 5th-year option after this season. But, if you take note to what we did in free agency under Adam Peters, we signed 3 linebackers in free agency. We drafted one, Jordan McGee. So, kind of the writing is on the wall. Where does Jamin Davis, where does Khaleke Hudson fit in to that linebacker room? We're not keeping 7 linebackers, for those of you keeping track of how many we have. So, look, 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 of those cats are not going to be on the active roster. Some of them are going to be on the practice squad, but, some of them could just be outright cut. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Temple is kind of a good little football school, right? Nothing big, not part of the big Power 5 conferences, that go around, playing anybody and everybody and, making the college bowl season, the big college bowl seasons, on an annual basis. But, they do put out some decent players, do have some toughness, and this kid is no slouch by that means. So, welcome to DC, Jordan McGee. Round 5, pick number 161. We picked Dominique Hampton, safety out of Washington. As I alluded to earlier, when we picked the cornerback out of Michigan, our secondary was Swiss cheese last year. You heard me say that probably 10 times. Probably 10 times every episode on Commander's Gridiron last season, or Swiss cheese or any other adjective or analogy that you want to use to that, right? So I'm kind of glad they took a couple picks in the secondary. Look, once you're going 5th round, 6th round, 7th round, are you really getting starters? Maybe, maybe not. Are you looking at the upside or the potential of players to have an impact or be a rotational player or even, come in on those vital nickel packages? Absolutely. So as Paul says, Hampton was a late Dan Quinn pick. He's a flyer in the middle of the field, nice size. I think he's 6'3". He's a hybrid, 11 hat on the ball, that type of guy. And you know what? Coming out of Washington and that big Pac-12 or Pac-10 conference out there with Oregon, USC, UCLA, and all those teams before all the realignment coming up, he definitely got some work facing a lot of those top quarterbacks out there on the West Coast. So, hey, look, going from one Washington to the next Washington, welcome to Washington, D.C., Dominic Hampton. Round 7, pick number 222, our last pick of the NFL draft. Formally, before we get into the next section, was defensive end Javonte Jean-Baptiste, defensive end out of Notre Dame. It's kind of interesting. Look, hey, here's our 7th round pick, number 222. Will he make the team? Who knows? But going into this season, even before free agency, we had zero defensive ends on our team. So it'll be interesting to see what he does, how he contributes. Does he make the final 53? Does he become a practice squad guy? Paul Spencer, who is a big Notre Dame fan, catch him every week on the Notre Dame show. John Batiste, I'm high on him. Huge motor, solid IQ. One loves his gameplay, plus Notre Dame. Great pick, right? Thanks. I appreciate that. I'm not the most humongous college football follower and fan. So a lot of these guys, you kind of got to do a little bit of homework to figure out who these cats are. Because let's be honest, once you get out of like the 2nd round, maybe 3rd, then you're kind of like, who is this dude? Do a little research, do some homework on them, kind of figure out what makes them tick, why they got drafted where they were, see if you can figure out how they fit into your team schemes and kind of go from there, right? So as Kenny Fry says, if you were to grade the Commanders draft, what would you give it? Well, it's kind of funny that you say that, Kenny, because the next section of our show tonight is the draft grades that basically were given to the Washington Commanders. Now, for me personally, I'm not as high as what we're about to cover. The majority of sports outlets gave the Washington Commanders anywhere from an A+ to like an A-. I'm kind of in the A- to B+, maybe even B+. I don't know if that's because I am kind of biased towards the most recent seasons of draft casualties that I've had to endure as a team fan and loyalist. Without looking at this draft under new GM Adam Peters, like 100% objectively, right? Knowing that, we've had opportunities for years under Ron Rivera and company to draft better players, not project pieces as 1st rounders or 2nd rounders for that matter. So I if we would have been able to nail an offensive tackle, either back up in the 1st round and complete that trade process that we weren't, or go tackle at number 36, then I will wholeheartedly would have gave my team an A-, maybe even a solid A, right? But since we missed the mark on offensive linemen, and that's kind of like our biggest need, I kind of, are settling around that B+ range. But for sake of grading, and it's kind of interesting because like a lot of fans were like, oh my God, like this wasn't a good draft. People that weren't doing their homework, don't know who we drafted, blah, 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 blah. But it looks like the biggest range of sports outlets gave us an A to A-. CBS Sports and Sports Illustrated gave us an A+. The Ringer, the Associated Press, the Sporting News, NBC Sports, and Pro Football Focus all gave us a solid A. USA Today, NFL Network, and ESPN gave us an A-. So it kind of seems like A was kind of the solid way around. But I kind of feel that we just have too many important holes left to give us an A, if that makes sense. So Paul Spencer says, I gave it a solid B. Many holes were filled, but many could be project players. Needed the offensive tackle. Yep. I looked more at the O-line more than I would have, to be an A. And you're absolutely right. Like I said, if we could have nailed some line, at least a little bit higher than Coleman, and Coleman might work very well for us somewhere on that offensive line. I think our grade would be higher, but hey, for the first year and kind of, not knowing what to expect with, new GM Adam Peters, not know to what to expect with all those picks and new head coach Dan Quinn and his staff, I think we did really well. So, it's going to be super interesting to see where we go from here. We still do have some serious holes, a couple of them, not too many. But, I'm going to trust the process, trust the guys that are there, and kind of see what happens. So before we wrap up tonight, we got 2 more quick topics to go. As always, and I feel it's kind of the same with every team, you may just not hear about it unless you're a fan of your team. Look, as soon as the draft is done, within the next 48 hours after the draft, your team starts signing guys that, you're like, who, what, when, where, why, whatever. These players are called the UDFAs, the undrafted free agents. And look, Washington is not unlike any other probably pro football team that we go through and sign 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We signed 10. As Paul says, but one of your UDFAs made it A+. Hartman out of Notre Dame. Of course you're going to say that, right? And but we signed 10. We signed 10 undrafted free agents. Some of these guys are going to be practice squad guys. Some of these guys could be complete shockers and make the 53-man roster. Some of them could go through training camp and be signed to the practice squad as project pieces. They all have a different fate. They all have a different role. They kind of all have a different path, right? So let's go down these real quick as we wrap up tonight's episode. Leading off the top, as Paul said, we signed quarterback. He seems like he's 40 years old. Sam Hartman, quarterback out of Notre Dame. Running back Austin Jones out of USC. Running back Michael Wiley out of Arizona. Wide receiver Marcus Jack Saint out of Georgia. I know I'm going to butcher this name. David Nguagwu, offensive lineman out of Toledo. Darrell Pollard, defensive tackle, Virginia Tech. Anuzium, cornerback out of Colorado State, played for they're in the rivals of our beloved Deion Sanders. AJ Woods, DB out of the University of Pittsburgh, and Tyler Owens, DB out of Texas Tech. So even though, look, a lot of these guys probably aren't even going to make the 53-man roster, it was nice to see that some of those guys do address some need of different holes that we have still on our team, right? A couple offensive linemen, a couple DBs, kind of to see what's going to happen, right? So, hey, welcome to DC, all of you fellas. The undrafted free agent signings for the Commanders are starting to roll out. I don't know if that's going to be all of them, but, hey, it kind of is what it is. And, hopefully some of them can be a spark, have something that some of the other guys don't have, and one of them might make the final 53. But last topic for tonight, as you see it scrolling across the bottom, as Paul says, it's funny, Hartman is the oldest quarterback in the room. Mariota's 30, Hartman's 24. Well, Hartman feels like he's 30, and Mariota feels like he's 24. But depending on what happens with Cliff Kingsbury's offense, the potential for the starting offensive weapon lineup would be Jaden Daniels, quarterback. And this is kind of where the toss-up becomes. And we're going to skip that and come back. Obviously, wide receiver number 1 is going to be Terry McLaurin. Wide receiver number 2 is going to be Jahan Dotson. Wide receiver number 3 is kind of up in the air right now. Could it be a rookie? Could it be Jamison Crowder? Could it be Diami Brown? Kind of who knows, right? Don't know. Starting tight end right now would be Zach Ertz. And then we go back to running back. This is where the discussion kind of comes in, right? In Cliff Kingsbury's offense, are you more likely to see Austin Eckler, who had a couple of predominant years as a LA Charger, get the starting nod at running back, or is it going to be Brian Robinson, who's been the starting running back for the last year and a half here in DC? It'll kind of be interesting to see which way Kingsbury wants to go with that, right? if you're looking for more of like the passing running back with a little more finesse, and that kind of route, you're going to see Eckler. If you want the bruising north and south back, rushing with not as much catching acumen, then you're going to see B-Rob. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, right? But I agree with Paul that running back room is going to be a scary 1-2 punch, but Eckler is the pass catcher and it fits Kingsbury's offense. And I agree with you. I think that's what you're going to end up seeing. As much as I love B-Rob, done some autograph signings with him, met him in person at a couple events, plus seeing what he's done on the field. He's a great bruiser. Definitely, that thunder lightning combination between him and Eckler. Throw in a little Chris Rodriguez, and we're gonna have a good running back room. It'll just be interesting to see how Kingsbury comes through and rotates all those guys throughout his offense to see what they do. So real quick, the next episode for Commanders Gridiron is going to be on Tuesday, May 28th. As Paul says, hey, it reminds me of the Cowboys, Pollard and Zeke, one of which is only still there in Dallas since Pollard is no longer there. But like I said, our next episode here is going to be Tuesday, May 28th at 8:30 p.m. We're going to have lots to talk about. There is wide speculation that the NFL schedule is going to get released this Thursday afternoon. So, by the time we come to our next show in 3 weeks, the NFL schedule will be released. So we'll go ahead and talk about that. We're going to do what we call the way too early schedule preview, kind of show some predictions, not necessarily a record prediction, but we'll probably end up going there before the end of the night. Can we really predict a schedule or a season based before we even get to training camp? Sure. Why not? We'll play along. We'll look at what teams are like on paper right now. And go from there. And, we're going to give a little bit more to chat about. We're going to have a little bit review on the rookie mini camps. They're actually taking place this weekend. Actually going to be this weekend and next weekend. It's like 6 or 7 days, followed by OTAs as well. So we'll have some news, some tidbits coming in and out of there. We're going to see how Jaden Daniels does in rookie mini camp as well as OTAs. Hopefully we have rookie jersey numbers assigned maybe by then. We'll at least know if Jaden Daniels got his number 5 out of Tress Way or not, or whether he's had to go to something else. And of course, as always, if something pops up in the DC market here on or off the field, basically I screenshot it, make a mental note of it, save it in the phone, and add it under a topic to be discovered here on, Commander's Gridiron. So, it's just something that it's kind of how we track, what to talk about and what to do from here. But, as always, been in the off season, it's kind of slow for happenings and news, but we try to keep it active and try to keep it entertaining here on the podcast. Right. And before we leave for tonight, just remember that, we have a new show here at Out of the Box Sports Network. It's called Inside the Octagon. It's the UFC talk, debuting May 27th with Josh and Paul. You probably see Paul all over the place here at Out of the Box Sports. It's going to be on Mondays, 8:30 p.m. on any of our Out of the Box Sports platform. That's going to be Inside the Octagon at 8:30. As always, thank you for joining me here at Commander's Gridiron. Our next episode will be Tuesday, May 28th, 8:30 p.m. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Have a good night.